These are some random clips from MK11, MK12, Injustice 1, and Injustice 2. Now here's some random clips from MKX. The early 2010s were an exciting time for the Mortal Kombat community. NetherRealm had just come off of releasing Mortal Kombat 2011, commonly known as Mortal Kombat 9, their first proper title in a long while. Mortal Kombat 9 was a smash hit that succeeded in rejuvenating the brand after Midway's bankruptcy and after Mortal Kombat Armageddon and MK vs. DC squandered it and left many fans disappointed. Overall, it remains probably NetherRealm Studios' most beloved title by the highest number of people to this day. It also marked Mortal Kombat's first foray into the competitive scene. UMK3 has its own little competitive niche that's still around for the most part, but is mostly limited to a small subset of the MK community. The 3D-era titles were designed more as fun games to play with your friends and had too many broken gameplay elements and loopholes to be considered competitive. So MK9 was the franchise's first serious attempt at becoming an esport. And despite the limited support, the lack of resources, the lack of a comprehensive practice mode, and the lack of frame data provided within the game, such that players were forced to mine it on their own and shared with each other, the grassroots competitive MK9 movement did quite well for itself, with strong showings at EVO, MLG, and plenty of community-led events like Combo Breaker and CEO, with a host of strong players and early adopters like Perfect Legend, Rio, CD Jr., MK Tom Brady, Pig of the Hut, Dizzy, Tyrant, DJT, Forever King, Justin Wong, Chris G, Michelangelo, and many others, all pushing the game to its limit and helping legitimize Mortal Kombat as an esport. MK9's back-to-basic approach with 2D fighting and fast-paced combat was a smash hit, and NetherRealm Studios were keen to capitalize on the momentum and foundation that MK9 provided with their next title. As this was going to be the 10th title in the official mainline series, the company wanted to do something special and emphasize the core elements that the series became known for over the years. Dark, visceral aesthetics, gut-wrenching brutality, immersive lore, and intense, fast-paced one-on-one combat. The vision was not just to build on what MK9 had pioneered, but also to capture the elements that the series has always done best historically, crystallize them, and put them all in one game as a way to celebrate the franchise and carry its legacy forward. From the very beginning, the emphasis was placed on 1v1 fighting. Tag teams and minigames were all cool, but this was the time for the essential, core part of the fighting game to shine. No bells and whistles, no extraneous mechanics, just mano-a-mano, you versus me combat. Two people fighting to the death, the true definition of Mortal Kombat. In addition, running made its return to the franchise after being absent since the days of MK3 and MK4. A major part of Mortal Kombat's appeal was always the no-nonsense fighting, with explosive attacks and a strong emphasis on rushdown and overall aggression, and a run mechanic fit right in with all of that. The dark tone and grit were also doubled down on, as they're another staple of the series, whereas MK9 was a bit more neutral in tone and had a more poppy, vibrant, almost superhero aesthetic, where the characters looked and felt like action figures come to life. MKX was a lot darker, the colors were desaturated, the lighting was creepier, and the characters felt more like people than comic book characters, with slightly more realistic proportions and less exuberant outfits. The overall style looked more like something out of an action thriller or even a horror flick. And while some of the technologies and work done, like a couple low-fidelity faces and the sweat drops that looked like bubble wrap, were hit and miss, overall, the game was a visual and sonic improvement over its predecessor. The characters felt more real, the locations more lived in, the punching and kicking sounded more raw and painful than ever, like a real kick to the stomach, and the improved X-ray attacks made even the non-squeamish wince away in the best way possible. When it came time to spread the word about the upcoming game, NetherRealm and Warner Bros. Spared no expense. Everything about this marketing campaign was perfect, from the main trailer that featured System of a Down's Chop Suey, which effortlessly evoked the raw, brutal nature of the game, as well as referencing the disastrous events of its predecessor and the consequences that this game's story mode would have to wrestle with, all the way to the Fatal 8 tournament, a special invitational where a select few players were invited to have some hands-on time with the game, pick a character that they felt suited them, lab whatever they could in the limited time they had, and then compete against each other in a one-day tournament to decide the winner and generate more hype for the game. Anticipation was at an all-time high. The atmosphere was electric. All of this worked splendidly and resulted in the best launch in Mortal Kombat's history up to that point, with Ed Boon himself stating that it was the fastest-selling MK game in the franchise's history. Mortal Kombat has always sat in an interesting spot in relation to both casuals and hardcore fighting game enthusiasts. It's widely adopted by the easygoing masses because of its more audacious elements and cool ninja-heavy aesthetics that effortlessly mix Western and Eastern culture together, so there's something there for everyone, but these are also not the kind of people that dive deep into a game's mechanics and systems and stick with it in the long run. That would be the people that live and breathe fighting games, and competitive games in general, and well, Mortal Kombat doesn't fare much better in the long run with them either. Because the things that they generally value and consider to be part of a refined, comprehensive fighting game experience, like really technical inputs, elaborate footsies, link-based combos, back-blocking, crossover attacks, and fireball clashing, aren't really part of the MK experience. So Mortal Kombat often ends up the butt of the joke in the fighting game community. In a weird way, it's a victim of its own popularity. It occupies that enviable but also uncomfortable spot. Because everyone knows and samples it, it's not allowed to really cater to any one niche, so it doesn't generate much devotion from most groups in the long run, which can sometimes be an unfortunate drawback of extreme notoriety. But this inadequacy can also be viewed as a strength. The beauty of MK is it does away with extraneous detail and makes the fighting look simpler and thus more lifelike. Gone are the freeze frames accompanying each attack that connects, the pretty but ultimately cardboard feel of anime aesthetics, the overwhelming number of slash effects, sparks, and explosions polluting the fighters, and the slow pacing that, while engaging for the players, is yawn-inducing for the viewer. Cause let's be honest, you'd never choreograph a high-octane Hollywood fist fight to look anything like this. And all of these are replaced with characters that move faster and more fluidly, animations that don't freeze, simpler but more impactful attacks, the swoosh effects are replaced with blood, and much faster overall pacing, all of which make Mortal Kombat not just enjoyable to play, but enjoyable to watch too. Building on that, the beauty of MKX specifically is it takes this simplified, stripped down and streamlined approach to combat and tries to develop it, to add depth to it in its own way. So it comes full circle. The early games took some of the depth out of 1v1 fighting and took it in a simpler direction, which MKX then explored and iterated upon to the point where this new model of combat developed its own sense of depth. MKX took the simple, stripped-down combat that the series was known for to the level of art. Simplicity became technical. MKX retains many of the simple functions that its predecessors were built on, like universal uppercuts, universal sweeps, 4 attack buttons, a block button, dial-up combos, to which it adds a run function, allowing players to quickly close the distance via a run mechanic and start their offenses in line with the highly aggressive gameplay that they were trying to refine, so bringing it back was a no-brainer. Rushdown was deliberately emphasized. Corner play is huge, enforcing pressure is huge, defensive options were overhauled, both to make enforcing pressure more tenable and to make the wake-up game something you have to take much more seriously and that you had to work for. Gone were invincibility frames from most moves and wake-up attacks. You could no longer get up just because you wanted to, and because you could reach for this one move that had invincibility frames, and armor on top of it in case you mistimed it. Now you had no invincibility frames and armor was weaker across the board. Not to mention that meter became far more precious cautious overall, so you had to seriously weigh your options. Do I tech roll to try and get up before he reaches me? Do I delay my wake up and hope it throws him off? Do I try to jump out? Do I try to armor through? Or do I try to backdash? Backdashes offer a couple invincibility frames, which could help you out of a bind, but their efficacy varied, so the system emphasized evasion and trying to weasel your way out of a bad situation through backdashing, jumping, wake up buttons, or using interactables. You could argue armor was almost as effective as invincible wake up attacks, except most armor tanked just one hit, especially back then, and thus was easily broken. What all this meant was that getting knocked down mid-screen, or worse, in the corner, often meant a death sentence. Thus, it encouraged people to stay as mobile as possible, which amounted to the game feeling very punishing, especially in the beginning before players figured out how to navigate it and use the tools given to them. It also made the fights seem a little bit more scrappy or YOLO-ish, because oftentimes it'd be better to wake up jump instead of standing there trying to guess the next 50-50, just because that's the correct way posh gentlemen play fighting games. Jumping would often mean you get clipped, but not fully comboed, because your opponent's pressure string didn't account for you being airborne, so they wouldn't hit confirm properly, allowing you to slip through their fingers. Which might seem silly or like the game isn't meant to be played that way, but then again, just because something looks scrappy or improvised doesn't mean it's not a viable tactic. Just like how zoning looks lame and unfair to the non-initiated, or sucker punching someone or kneeing them in the scrotum. These tactics might seem unrefined or underhanded, but it doesn't mean they don't work. In all-out warfare, the only rule of engagement is there are no rules of engagement. You do what you need to win. And that's one of the key things that MKX emphasized beautifully, partly because the game allowed for enough freedom to form a wide range of strategies and attacks, something that its successors undervalued and severely stripped down. The key thing that made Mortal Kombat X not just successful during its initial wave, but so beloved and talked about by many a decade after it, was its freedom of expression. Characters are far less constrained than in other games. The combo system and gravity rules give you plenty of options when crafting your combos, and the freedom of movement players get means you can capitalize on all sorts of stray hits and happy accidents. Uppercuts generally have a gigantic recovery window on hit. What this means is it's usually more or less impossible to combo off of one. However, in games like MK9 and MKX, while you still can't combo off of it in normal situations, if your opponent happens to be high enough in the air when it connects, you can oftentimes recover just fast enough to continue the juggle, because the uppercut sends them flying higher, so you recover from the uppercut animation faster than they fall to the ground. The classic use case for this is corner combos. If constructed a particular way, you can whack them with an uppercut at a particular point in the combo that won't send them flying to the other side of the screen, instead keeping them in the corner, and your character will recover from performing that uppercut faster than the other character will hit the ground, so you can continue to juggle them right after. Even more impressive is nailing a neutral jump punch right after the uppercut, which some scenarios will allow you to do, but the timing is very strict, and this becomes almost like a mini-game in itself, spending countless hours in training mode, trying out a single combo in a single scenario dozens of ways, experimenting with different things, paying attention to the damage scaling and trying out different attacks sooner or later in the combo to see what scales less and gives you more damage. It's something that you do in every fighting game, but it's something that MKX made extremely engaging by opening up a world of possibilities to the player. There's a remarkably high number of scenarios you can practice for and develop proper responses, combos, and punishes to, and once you're familiar enough with the game and the character you're playing, you'll find yourself improvising your way through a match, surprising even yourself with the swaggy display you just pulled out of nowhere. And there's very few games out there that make you feel that way, that have this kind of expressiveness to them, to say nothing of the litany of combos you can spend countless hours labbing in training mode. Even today, I see people whip out new combos, setups, and all sorts of interesting tech that I've never seen before in all my years of combat. MK9 also offered a lot of freedom of expression. The two games are fairly similar in many ways, but where they differ is the general way you play each game. MKX requires you to be hyper-aware at all times to avoid getting stuck in a bad pressure situation or an infinite vortex, because things can snowball out of control faster than in probably any other fighting game. Because of this, MKX plays a lot like a brutal cat-and-mouse game whereby you constantly try to get the other guy caught in a constant guessing game and inevitably pinned in the corner in the process, process while avoiding anything that could send you there yourself. By contrast, MK9 sort of just let you throw things out in a lot of cases. There's still a lot of gunning for the corner and strong offense, of course, but a lot of times it's okay for Reptile to just throw out a random dash, or Jax to throw out a dash punch. If you try to do that in MKX, you'll eat your teeth for breakfast and 6 out of 10 times lose the round. But in 9, these things are less punishable, so we can both just throw things out more often and nibble away at each other's health bars bit by bit with each tiny risk we take. It's specific situations that we need to avoid getting ourselves into, like getting caught in a Cyrax net, because that means bombs, it means high damage into unblockable reset, into more damage, into GG. It's kinda like one chess grandmaster shaking the hand of the other chess grandmaster in defeat after like 4 moves and you don't even understand what the hell's going on. So MK9 has 2 different gears. Gear 1, where we can risk all sorts of minor attacks without dying, and Gear 2, where things become apocalyptic if specific conditions are met, and your health bar can get deleted so quickly it makes MKX seem like the most balanced game in the world by comparison.
He ultimately puts the Cabal player in the corner, and that's where he gets a lot of damage. Here it is, taking away his meter. That's gonna do 80%. This will kill him if he does not drop it. And there it is, he kills him!
Game 1, everybody in the crowd is getting
Round 1 going to DJT.
Conversely, MKX lowered the margin for error, the requirements to get into that second gear, so drastically that it's almost the only gear the game has. But it also did away with a lot of the decidedly cheap things its predecessor sported. For all the flack MKX gets about being broken or unbalanced, it doesn't have the unblockables, infinites, and dash cancels that 9 does. So MK9 offered a freedom of a slightly different sort, balancing the risk-reward ratio such that it encouraged players to feel each other out and take more risks, but also punished them if they made bigger, more obvious mistakes, a balance that makes its gameplay so well loved to this day, while MKX leaves much less room for error, but also tweaked down the higher end of the damage you could receive if you do commit an error. Cyrax's bombs went from being unblockable to being low attacks, and his damage scaling was nerfed to the point of it becoming a meme within the community. Reptile's dash and force balls are much easier to punish now and have much higher recovery, which makes the dash move in particular a much more niche tool, and Cabal can no longer cancel his Nomad dash endlessly because there is no Cabal. Couple that with the high speed of MKX and thus the quick reactions that are necessary to survive in a high-level match, and this created an environment where the players are always on edge and viewers are always at the edge of their seats. And because life bars can get whittled away so quickly by a Vortex, a high-pressure character, or a 50-50 one, that also means that the comeback potential in this game is huge. And it's one of the things that makes MKX so exciting and nail-biting to watch. You truly never know what's gonna happen.
1%. He's gotta run through. He's staying alive here. The overhead. He's gonna wake up. He's gonna wake up Sun. Does this kill? No! Oh my god! Holy what are we watching, chat? What are we watching? Mike, I can't take this. See how much they end up getting. But I think it's like $140, $150 right now. They're playing for $140, $150. Oh, he dropped a combo that's very uncharacteristic from Ninja Killer. Oh my god! Wow! Oh!
Just need to land, and he gets picked it up. He needs one hit. He needs it. Oh! He delayed the teleport. He delayed it. Unbearable skill.
He can't afford much more damage here. He cannot afford much more damage here.
Oh! He won the spin.
Oh my god! He finds it! Wait! He finds it! This doesn't kill! This doesn't kill, but it's gonna set up one knockdown! He can chip out!
Is he gonna do it? He will! Unbearable skill is going to the grand finals!
MKX definitely errs on the side of quality over quantity. Does it really matter that matches last longer if most of that time is spent micro-dashing, turtling, or eating combos that take way too long to play out? Does that make them more exciting to watch? No. On the flip side, if matches have a lot of hype moments, even if they're short, viewers get a lot more out of them. Movement in MKX also differs from MK9 significantly and from most fighters out there. A lot of fighting games offer dash cancels. What this means is that after you perform a forward dash or back dash, pressing most buttons during the animation will cancel the dash. Meaning, not only can you just throw out a dash whenever you feel like it, because you can always stop the animation and block an incoming attack if need be, canceling the animation early and dashing again tends to cover ground faster than dashing, waiting for the animation to finish, then dashing again. And some games deliberately build on this idea by implementing wave dashing, which dramatically speeds up movement when doing this in sequence, allowing you to chain dash canceling for a speed boost. However, the unintended side effect of this is walking becomes nearly obsolete. Dashing is faster, and if there's no penalty to using it and it can be cancelled whenever you wish, there's little reason to use normal movement outside of specific scenarios where you're trying to subtly outspace your opponent, trip guard them, or any kind of footsies in general, which aren't that big of a tactic in Mortal Kombat games anyway. Fighting games threaten to end up missing the forest for the trees fairly quickly here. If dashing becomes the primary mode of movement, why not make it the primary mode of movement? You end up furiously double tapping for a living and for no real reason when the game could just make general movement a bit faster instead and spare you the extra arbitrary button presses. MK4, for all its faults, handled movement much more pragmatically. Back then there was no dashing in MK games, and so standard forward and backward movement had to be faster to compensate for it, i.e. normal walk speed actually mattered. And in MK4 specifically, it was pretty damn fast, such that you could actually play footsies and maneuver quite effectively. Between that and the run button that the game sported, you had all the movement tools you needed. If you were to add a dash function in MK4, it would have to be a pretty good one to warrant its existence. And that's exactly what MKX did. In X, dashes cover a lot more ground, allowing you to traverse a sizable chunk of the stage just by double tapping. To compensate for this, you can no longer cancel dashes willy-nilly. Back dashes are completely uncancelable, while forward dashes can only be cancelled into a run. The only way to run in this game is to forward dash first, then cancel into a run by pressing block. This gives dashing much more weight and importance, without sacrificing normal walking in the process. Whereas before it was just mildly better than walking and came with no drawbacks, now it covered a lot of space but came at a cost. Running notwithstanding, you now need to fully commit to a dash and let the animation play out. This made dashing a much more strategic tool. You can't just throw one out whenever you feel like for fear of eating a projectile or a flying kick. Their increased liability forces players to use walking more, and characters' walking speeds were adjusted to compensate for it, although I'd argue they could have been even more generous with it. At the same time, dashes are very effective for retreating or closing the distance quickly and conserving stamina, so there's a large enough incentive to use them. More useful still, backdashes now have invulnerability on the first couple frames, which can really come in handy in a pinch. And because of that, and because being able to quickly pull away from pressure is so vital in this game, backdashing depletes half of your stamina bar, the same resource used for running and braking. This gives you 2 consecutive uses if need be, while also keeping you from abusing it endlessly. This overall approach to movement is, to my knowledge, fairly unique to Mortal Kombat X, and it solves the common problem of redundancy of movement in a fighting game. It's not everyone's cup of tea. Most people prefer to have the dash cancelling of MK9, probably because it feels more freeing, and that's something I definitely relate to. When I first tried MKX, the character's movements felt so much more constrained compared to his predecessor, but that's primarily because I had gotten so used to MK9's control scheme for so long, and also because I didn't yet understand how to use the tools that were given to me. And when it comes down to it, being able to run in any fighting game, where the first dimension is arguably the most important, is far more crucial and freeing than any kind of preset short-range dash. Quick side note, look at how ridiculous Kano's dashes are. They literally cover the whole screen. What the fuck? Meanwhile, I'm stuck with this baby step. Bro looks like he almost tripped on a banana peel. Like, how the hell does a middle-aged human normo have a better dash than the lightning-fast alien lizard assassin? Thanks for that, Netherrealm. Another thing that gave MKX such long legs to stand on is variations. Now this remains a hot topic within the community to this day, with some people praising the optionality variations provide, while others claiming they actually reduce optionality, stripping away moves, slicing a full character into 3 incomplete chunks, and there's a lot of apprehension surrounding this system. The argument that variations make a character feel incomplete, while sensible on the surface, is inch deep. At its core, the basic framework of the the variation system isn't based on removing moves, but adding them or changing their properties. Tremor's Rock Drop, Rock Toss, Ground Pulse, Rolling Stone, Stone Punch, Stone Shatter, and their enhanced versions all carry over from one variation to another. His entire kit is universal. It just changes visually depending on which variation you sport, turning from rock to crystal in crystalline or to metal and lava in his metallic variation. Moreover, some of the frame data changes for a couple of these moves and they gain new properties. His cookie cutter behaves the same way in both his aftershock and crystalline variations, but it becomes a launcher in the lava stance of his metallic variation, popping the enemy up for an easy follow-up even at range, courtesy of the run mechanic. You can also chain it up to 5 times. 5, which gives it several strategic uses. For one, it becomes a counterplay tool to get around breakers, since you can't break a combo while being hit by a special move, and if all the hits are special moves, you'll just have to take it. And for another, special moves build a significant amount of meter, so if your execution is on point, spamming this 5 times will fill up your meter bar quite a bit while also bringing the opponent closer to you. Same idea with his up rock launcher. And then the lava version of his shatter becomes a restand tool, enabling some minor vortex play, i.e. deliberately keeping your opponent on their feet, denying them a wake-up and reducing their options to just guessing whatever mix-up you throw at them next. Oh, and it also gains an extra hit of armor in that variation, so it becomes one of the best armored wake-ups and counterplay moves you have. And on top of that, each variation actually adds moves. Aftershock adds an airquake and a timed ground pulse to use as a setup tool. Metallic adds an extra projectile that's faster and more versatile than your other zoning tools, and this is the same variation that gives you the 2 lava pop-ups, the restand, and the extra armor, by the way. And Crystalline gives you the infamous flex-up and the ability to summon your own interactable, which admittedly is never used, but I can see the reasoning behind it. Takeda retains most of his whip normals, and they just add stuff on top, like the teleport and scorpion-like spear, a couple extra whip specials and normals with increased range, or freaking lightsabers to use in conjunction with the whips. Tanya maintains access to most of her signature moves and just gets different weapons to play with in each variation. Bladed Tomfas that allow you to chain together special moves, also known as Rekkas, allowing for a unique brand of mix-ups while also giving her access to a projectile, a polearm that turns her into a mid-range character that dominates the space within jump distance, and a variety of fireballs which, yes, they used to be a bread-and-butter move in past games, but not nearly as effective as they are here. Triborg is literally 4 characters in one, and it turns out the vast majority of the cast is designed this way, so the argument that most characters have their moves gutted is born and perpetuated as a result of people not doing their due diligence and commenting from a place of knee-jerk emotion rather than knowledge, or just parroting the loudest opinion from the person next to them. One variation of this sentiment, pun not intended, is that some of these variations gatekeep certain signature moves, like Raiden's teleport or Sub-Zero's ice clone, behind one particular variation instead of letting them be available across all variations like the rest of their kit. And while this is true, and I do try to address it here, it turns out it's just these 2 characters that have this problem. Technically 3 if you add Reptile's invisibility, but no one really cares about that, so it's 2 characters. 2 out of a roster of 33 characters. Yet people still have it in their heads that MKX ruined its entire cast's movesets and that variations are somehow inherently bad because of it and can't be done right, when it turns out they were, in fact, done right for the vast majority of the characters all along. This idea caught traction back when the game was first released, and I still get comments and knee-jerk arguments about it to this day. The other thing detractors will do is point to MK11 and how, even though it attempted to iterate on this concept, the quality of its variations left much to be desired. And I don't see why you would make that argument, because MK11 was never meant to have variations. It was built from the ground up to support custom moves, which is a different system entirely. The devs not making it work in time and rebranding the whole thing as variations on launch is not an indictment on the variation system nor its potential. MK11 is in no way, shape, or form a successor of MKX, since it went out of its way to abolish every major thing that it achieved. And speaking purely of optionality and variety of gameplay, compare any one variation of MKX Reptile, imperfect and unfinished as they are, to what the full version of Reptile can do in MK12. Or compare any one of Scorpion's variations to MK11 MK11 or MK12 Scorpion. Any one variation from any one MKX character blows the supposedly complete characters of later games out of the water. But of course, some people will still ask, why not have all these tools in one character? Why not give Tanya Tonfas, Fireballs, and a Naginata and do away with her variations? Which is like asking, why can't you get Scorpion's Spear, Ermac's Telekinesis, Sub-Zero's Ice Ball, and Reptile's Force Balls all in one character? And that's the thing. These shouldn't be viewed as variations, facets, or parts of a character, but as different characters altogether. And that's the point of having different characters, to give them all particular strengths and weaknesses. Otherwise, they all become the same character. Asking why I don't get an OP shoulder cannon, OP armored move, and OP trap all in the same package is literally like asking why I don't get Kitana, Jason, and Cyber Sub-Zero in one character. And you would never ask for something like that. Really, if the variation system fails at anything, it's marketing, because it clearly didn't market itself properly and remains poorly understood to this day. Moving over to some of the more valid critiques, some of the variations in MKX remain glaringly unfinished or poorly designed from the start. Unbreakable Sub-Zero is an often cited case study, as is Inferno Scorpion, because both of these variations are completely redundant and rendered useless by other variations that each character sports. As an aside, it's ironic that the two poster boys of Mortal Kombat get the worst treatment in this regard, as they're part of a select few characters that never got three completely distinct variations with their own unique strengths. Also in this category are Necromancer Shinnok and Warlock Quan Chi. While Necromancer isn't redundant to either of Shinnok's other two variations, the tools Necromancer gets are gimmicky and just not strong enough to justify picking this variation over the other two in all but the most niche scenarios. The tracking on his flick and grab moves isn't all that great, and the recovery is too great to justify using it at any distance other than full screen. And the unblockable SWAT is too gimmicky to consistently get off against a veteran player who knows what they're doing. Warlock Quan has a similar problem, with his portal kick hitting the wrong way, since most of the time people will try to charge at you instead of hanging back, so the leg doesn't connect and you eat a full combo for it. His shin grabbing move lacks any kind of marginal utility except when meter burned, and even then it's one more launcher and combo extender that you don't need and have to sacrifice meter for. The real gold in this variation was supposed to be his restand. His enhanced portal sword strike leaves you with a ton of hit advantage and acts as a restand right up until the opponent fully hits the ground, allowing you to enforce some pressure. The problem is they nerfed it into the ground, whereby it only works this way if the opponent remains grounded the whole time. If you juggle them in the air and then end your combo with the restand, they fall down twice as fast. Not to mention that, even though this move provides some much needed armor for Quan, the move's hitbox is so finicky that it misses half the time. None of these tools come even remotely close to the kind of utility, offense, or raw damage that Sorcerer and Summoner provide, and so Warlock remains something you pick when you want to inflict self-harm. Pun not intended, I think. Now, it's important to note that this isn't a failure of the variation system or its potential, but a failure of MKX specifically, as the fact that it never got to sort out these variations before its life cycle expired is on it. Another bit of criticism that's somewhat valid is that the original mission statement of variations was essentially to help character specialists. Fighting game players come in two flavors, broadly speaking: walking arsenals, who have a large number of characters in their repertoire, and specialists, who stick to a singular character, learn everything about them, and lab them and play them till they're blue in the face. As stated by the developers themselves, variations were meant to help the latter category of players. Sub-Zero specialists were supposed to have the option of switching to different variations of Sub when they encountered an opponent they couldn't beat with their current toolset, which they would then swap for a different toolset by way of the new variation. The problem is, most variations for most characters didn't end up being different enough to justify this strategy. All variations of Scorpion were some form of a Vortex character. All three Johnnies are pressure and mix-up characters. All three Quan Chi's game plan is more or less the same in both Sorcerer and Summoner. Tremor pretty much wants to rush you down regardless of variation. They didn't allow the characters to change enough between variations to facilitate this specialist function. None of Sub-Zero's variations turn him into a zoner, for instance, something that would have arguably helped him in a lot of matchups, which ultimately still makes you feel like you should be changing characters instead of variations to get around a bad matchup. So in this sense, variations felt a bit like fake news, like they were advertised as completely changing a character's archetype, when in reality, many characters remain the same archetype. They just got a couple different tools. Now, there are counterexamples. Tanya, one of the best designed characters in the game, does indeed change archetypes from variation to variation, becoming a pure zoner and pyromancer, which by the way is rare in NetherRealm games, because most zoners are also good pressure characters and also high damage characters, which is kinda silly when you think about it. But then she becomes a mix-up character in Kobujutsu and a mid-range monster in Dragon Naginata. 3 distinct archetypes, all while retaining most of her tools and her general mobility across variations. Instead of removing basic tools like her teleports, they were just factored in and allowed to mesh with each variation in their own way and make up its own flow and general game plan, which is brilliant game design. Predator also switches from a zoner to a trapper to a bruiser. Cassie goes from grappler to a setup character to a funky mix of restands plus air projectiles. So there are characters who actually do this, and it's also true that not every character needs to completely change from variation to variation. It is true that design-wise, some characters belong to a single archetype. They just make sense that way. Like Liu Kang is always going to have strong pressure no matter what, and Reptile is always going to be seen as some kind of a mix-up character. You just get that vibe from him. But even so, enough characters fail to fulfill this specialist fever dream of offering completely different archetypes and playstyles with the same character's variations that this remains a valid critique of not so much variations themselves, but of the original way they were marketed. It would be fairer to say that variations simply provided more variety to the game. More content, more things to try out, more ways to play. So while they didn't ultimately operate exactly as advertised, the end result added a lot to this game. So much so that people are still discovering variations and tech and uses for certain moves in certain situations today. For the longest time, Metallic Tremor was considered a useless variation. That is, until guys like Little Man showed everyone what it can do. And broadly speaking, you look at someone who's been practicing a singular character for the past 10 years and compare their matches with those from a decade ago, and the difference is night and day. All sorts of optimizations, new tech, and intricate details about their play that no one even knew was possible.
Oh my god, wait, that combo? What the? Bro, what was that? You see what I'm saying? There's new stuff being discovered till this day in Mortal Kombat X.
Gonna show Jay-Z's bottom lip. She's about to bust it with the combo interactable swag. Pow! 29%.
Cyrex here uses an interactable twice in one combo, a very improvised one, but he makes it work. And that's the start of the set. I've never seen anything like that before. I can't even commentate what's happening here fast enough. The micro duck, the poke to avoid the high, even having the balls to gamble that it would be a high, the character knowledge knowing there's a gap in there, the near comeback that Scorpion pulls. These two are by far the fastest characters in MKX. They both have fireball cancels and both require instant reaction time to play against, which both these players have. It is glorious to watch.
Or the exorcise! Plus on block once again, but again, the standing one to anti-cross up. Oh, that's gonna hit. Not quite enough to finish him. Oh. Oh, spinning the bar. Wasn't ready for it. Oh! The thing is though,
This is an important but easy to overlook moment. Sonic had 3 bars and was about to win the round. Tekken Master only had 1, and yet he still chose to burn his 1 bar to whittle away some of Sonic's health, which seems like a waste, but what ended up happening is the pressure that he put on him with that, potentially ending up in a vortex and losing the whole match, made Sonic break for 2 bars and then do an enhanced missile to make sure he gets the kill. So with that one seemingly reckless move, Tekken Master ended up draining all of Sonic's meter, which is a stroke of brilliance. That's the kind of strategy you can see in this game at the highest level. This video from Ilganowski is a great case study on how MKX lets you have actual play styles, whereas in 11 or 12 you more or less have one way of doing things with some minor variation in strategies here and there. In Mortal Kombat X you can recognize players based on how they play the same character. Ilganowski plays Reptile very differently, trying to capitalize on the meter burn slow motion as often as he can, and catch the opponent off guard with it. He favors this approach because, I mean, it's enough to take one look at any of his videos and realize that he's practiced those slow-mo combos for an endless amount of hours, so it makes sense that he tried to take advantage of that skill. Wizard, on the other hand, goes for pure aggression, smothers you, and uses a lot of his meter burn on meter burn force balls, much like I do, but in far more creative, effective ways, whereas Ilganowski plays a bit more conservatively, a bit more standard, and again hunts for those big, ridiculous, swaggy combos and makes comebacks mostly based off of that. You can approach one character, heck, one variation, multiple ways and make it work. This is what made people come back again and again to MKX. In terms of gameplay, it truly feels infinitely replayable. The traditional meter system is also the most refined it's ever been, with NetherRealm choosing to completely redesign it in the next game, only to double back to a middle-of-the-road version later on. Buildable meter is a pivotal mechanic in any fighting game, as the perks it unlocks tend to be some of the most useful, so building and managing your meter bar becomes a crucial skill for any fighting game player to learn, and Mortal Kombat X is no exception. Given how strong the offense is in this game, and due to additions like the run mechanic that can close the distance quickly, meter became more important than ever before as a crucial part of your defense, with armored wake-ups and combo breakers being absolutely indispensable and by far its two most used functions. This rendered X-rays, MK's equivalent to supers, and the third and final ability bestowed by the super meter, a non-occurrence in most matches, which in turn prompted the developers to divorce X-rays from any kind of resource in the next game and make them freely available every match. But this ultimately backfired, making super moves insufferably ubiquitous and a get-out-of-jail-free card for losing players. The fallacy here is expecting 3-bar abilities to be something that everyone should work towards all the time. This would not only hijack the other 2 meter abilities, it's also counter to the flavor of ultimate moves by and large, which are supposed to be these big shonen-style trump cards, the Amaterasu's and tailed beast balls that are only used in pivotal moments and are exciting to see partly because they're so rare. The truth is, even though they're rare, X-rays do happen, and you don't have to look that far to find a match where one is being used successfully. They're a niche tool, and that's fine. It's all they need to be. The main utility of X-rays is often misconstrued as being the damage they deal. But the damage is meager, as players know, barely on par with your average mid-screen combo. But that's not the point of X-rays, at least not in MKX. Their main perks are their speed, reach, and super armor. Having an attack that tracks your opponent across a large portion of the screen, if not full screen, punches through any flurry of blows no matter how numerous, and hits so quickly it's damn near unreactable, is a powerful tool to help you close out a game. And that's how we see it used most of the time, to finish off an opponent with a third of their health left in a clutch moment where all other options would fail. You're not very likely to get 3 bars of meter, so planning your entire strategy around hoarding your meter for it is, again, not very realistic, but it remains a great situational tool. What takes the meter system to the next level in this game is another resource bar: stamina. Stamina is actually pretty critical in this game, required for not just running, but backdashing, special cancels, and breakers too. Stamina getting depleted for both players is actually a big deal, as it prevents aggressors from running right back into your face, and it prevents defenders from scurrying out of the corner for free. It resets things back to neutral, much like a referee separating 2 boxers. You also get some sick animations for the breaking player's character, with them using their particular weapons, skills, or powers to shove the opponent away from them. Some very satisfying imagery. Block breakers are also possible, and while not as common, they can become important against pressure monsters like Liu Kang or Hellfire Scorpion, who can melt your entire life bar on block in seconds. So it's good that they thought of a way to mitigate this. As discussed earlier, backdashing is also a useful way to spend your stamina, because of the distance it covers and the few invulnerability frames it provides on startup. This, coupled with armored wake-ups and all of the other defensive options in the game, add up to a surprisingly robust defensive system, which was far from apparent initially, especially since on launch, armored attacks were also launchers, so everyone just used those and didn't much bother with delayed wake-ups, backdashes, wake-up jumping, or wake-up buttons. But armored launchers were far too swingy for MKX, so they were almost completely patched out, and extra hits of armor were added to make these options both more robust and truly defensive in nature. And after the dust settled years later, between armored wake-ups, raw non-enhanced wake-ups, delayed wake-ups, backdashes, jumping, micro-ducking, tech rolling, wake-up buttons, and blocking, you have a plethora of defensive options and will find a use for every single one. And then things like fireball cancels are a useful way to extend pressure, keep the round going, and keep the enemy guessing without having to resort to all or nothing 50-50s where one player ends up guessing right and the other player ends up dead. It adds a less drastic guessing game that also requires decent enough execution to pull off. Finally, there's the swingy nature of the game, and I consider talking talking about this in the cons section, but it's both a con and a positive, so I'll mention it here. Due to the aggressive nature of the game, it's easy to get stuck eating combos and pressure strings despite all your defensive options, leading to a melted life bar in a very short round time. Matches are known to sometimes fly by as soon as you blink. The game can often be too fast for its own good, and no amount of defensive tweaking can account for this. Which is not to say rounds always end too quickly, but when it does happen, it can feel frustrating for both the player and the viewer. But there's a flip side to this that doesn't get talked about. Because health bars can dissipate in the blink of an eye, that also means the losing player's comeback potential is astounding. Comebacks happen more often here than in any other game, and it's not uncommon to see a player at danger health spontaneously come back to life and skillfully liquidate the winning opponent's entire health bar. This makes MKX matches, particularly at tournaments, often spectacular to watch, with people holding their breath to see how a critical round will end up.
Nice tech, I like it. Neutral jump punch. I'm loving it right now.
Oh, it's gonna
Whoa!
steal his meter. He can't break, and that was so
That was
smart from
sexy.
Illusions. This is gonna be enough to kill if he completes
And
it
he
in
took the
Illusions.
meter.
Talk about meter, man. It's we're gonna see 40+%, but
Okay.
Raptor electing to break
Very smart.
and just taking his time, not forcing the issue.
And not going into the air almost at all. It's really only been air to airs.
There you go. Right on cue.
But it seems like Dragon, like he doesn't want to keep that space. It
Knocked down right in his face.
was waiting just in case.
Wow!
yeah.
And a bait on the X-ray. That is gonna hurt. Punch for the massive frame
Oh, the
advantage.
weight. I love it.
Empty jump overhead.
The backdash was there. And the low start. Illusion's not out of this. He needs a couple of series, but he's not out of it.
All right, taking the meter. Oh, and a run it back. It's a loop. She's never going to get the opportunity to break.
Oh, what? I love the idea. It didn't work out.
And the jump back one.
Too late.
Escapes.
Too late. Big chance now. Can he? Can
And
Dragon do
the
it?
lift.
What a call!
That was so godlike. EX lift. Sonic trying to slide into the DMs and slides his life bar away. He can't get it. That's such a tight combo. And
wow,
oh man,
amazing.
he is in X-ray
Can Sonic Fox
territory.
do this? Yes.
Oh, no.
boy.
And this is going to be an X-ray
That is
combo.
it.
Have some head. Oh, and the brutality. I don't like this. The Lin Kuei Adinian and Sonic
look,
Fox is taunting.
Personally, I think she looks better.
David Face.
Yeah, he has to be careful that hit.
Ooh.
Wow. Wow.
Right through. That was so good.
Yeah, just as I said that the hit comes back. Wow, see this is what okay, the back two is gonna connect. Wow.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
So
The
good.
flag is,
No, and that actually, the delay and the overhead.
yeah.
He's going to
This
need to
is
get a few
dangerous.
good series. I don't know if it's going to be armor. What's the setup here? Armor again, yes.
That's gonna be tough for Buffalo, I feel, to be honest. I know he has got a huge life lead, but okay, breakers. That's a good.
Oh,
just catches
trans!
him. Just catches him with the trans in mid-air.
He still needs more. Yes,
Okay.
here it is. This is what I'm looking for.
Look, he's going for the damage portal. Is that?
Oh no!
I don't even know.
No! Oh!
Oh, the interactable. What? I'm gonna be so sad.
Okay, that arm.
Oh, okay. But
No.
the armor is probably
It
up
probably
again.
is. Yes, it was. It was
And
key.
he's gonna be
He
able to get
survives.
right out of that. Oh my God.
Standing in the armor.
Yeah, this is gonna be tough. This is gonna
No,
be very
that's
tough.
such a good counter too.
Gonna be back in the corner again. Gets
He's a
stuck
meter.
out very
Into
nice.
the grab.
Into a throw.
That was stylish.
One
He has a
more.
flash parry on deck, though. He has a flash parry on deck. He's got to watch his projectiles. He had it right there.
Ooh. And he
The
got
down
another
three
one.
maintains the pressure.
This
EX
could do
Man's
it.
going to come in. All he needs is a chip. Gets the buff up.
Oh my God! One
Got to
miss.
find his poke. There it is.
He doesn't take
chip
chip
out.
damage.
He doesn't take
He
chip
doesn't
damage.
take chip.
And
Oh
Killer's
my
in
God.
on. Flexing. Doesn't take chip in the buff. The presence of mind to maintain. Magic Pixel.
Yeah.
You had zero room for error right there.
The hype factor has never peaked higher than in the game's tournament heyday, and seeing a losing player, and an underdog, climb out of a hopeless situation while the other player steadily crumbles and guesses wrong again and again until they're both in sudden death mode will never get old. Of course, the knowledge that you might lose even if you're at full health and the opponent is near zero is frustrating, but it's also the price you pay to have matches be this exciting, and it's something both players and devs consistently fail to understand understand about competitive games. Hype is tied to misery. When the game gets exciting for one player, and the audience as a whole, it automatically gets frustrating for the other player. You can't have safe, perfectly balanced games that aren't swingy at all, and have them be extremely exciting at the same time. And when devs try to do that, they end up with sterile, slow-paced experiments like Mortal Kombat 11. Banelings in StarCraft 2 are a frustrating unit that can swing the momentum of a match at any point. They're also responsible for some of the hypest moments in StarCraft 2's history.
Could be it.
Bomber can't afford to scan, so the oh god, the burrowed
there it
Banelings are
is.
huge. They're just over to the right a little bit more. Bring him out. Bait him. He's trying to bait. Oh my god! Oh my god! A perfect detonation. What we all expect to see when that kind of thing happens. Chasing the Medivacs back in. There's some
balls, but Scarlet on the regroup is.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
The crowd has lost their mind.
I think I've lost my mind.
Which is not to say you can't take this too far. Banelings themselves are arguably too powerful, mostly because Marines are too powerful. Hearthstone is a very exciting game to watch because its RNG guarantees spectacular upsets can happen at any time. But it's also that ridiculous amount of RNG that kept it from being taken seriously as an esport, since tournament outcomes were so often decided by a random dice roll that players' skill levels effectively stopped mattering, to the point where you could believably make the argument that there is no such thing as pro players in Hearthstone. But by that same token, if you completely do away with the swinginess of a game, in the name of eliminating player frustration, matches just end up boring people to tears. And ironically, the players stop playing as a result, because they feel too constrained as nothing exciting is allowed to happen. So MKX definitely erred more towards the exciting/frustrating part of the spectrum, but the game is just balanced enough to avoid getting in those situations too often. And the hype and comeback factor that result from this particularly delicate balance continue to make even the most random online MKX matches fresh and memorable. But high-level tournaments back when the game was still young is one thing. It's the people who stuck around and honed their skills in this game for the past 10 years that really took it to an art form. There's this level of proficiency that, when both players reach it, it just looks like a different game entirely. Every interaction these players have is so clean it looks scripted, and it's a wonder to watch. But in order to reach this level, the skill ceiling of the game has to be high enough to accommodate it. Apart from some subtle differences in reaction timing, MK11 and MK12 look about the same whether you're a high intermediate or an expert. But in MKX, there's a night and day difference between the two. It just looks like you're playing different games, and that's the telltale sign of gameplay that has some depth to it. A noob, even a low intermediate MKX player, looks like they're playing MK11 or 12, whereas a pro will just run circles around them. They look like a hacker by comparison. Cause a noob won't do much running, they haven't learned how to abuse the range of all their attacks, they don't do run cancels very well, their combos don't cover a wide enough range of situations, and they don't have the speed nor the creativity to react to various scenarios and adapt combos on the fly, and their general movement is overall not nearly as fluid as the game allows. But in 11, the difference between the movement of a noob and the most efficient movement the game allows is much smaller, save perhaps for wave dashing. That's why the visual difference between an MK11 intermediate and a pro isn't as striking. MKX, despite being so fast, is actually more balanced than MK12. If you look at these two clips side by side and pay attention to how much actual gameplay is happening throughout each round, ignore the combos. The combos are not gameplay. They're just one player reciting something from memory and the other player waiting for it to end. Look at the moments in between the combos. When you do that, you realize that MKX has way more gameplay in it compared to MK12. In MK12, it's pretty much 3 to 5 moments of actual playing the game, the rest is waiting. It's 3 to 5 decisions or gambles taken or reactions, stuff that actually requires the player's input. In the MKX round, there were like 18 such moments. It's much scrappier, and that's a good thing. A lot of the hits were low damage combos, grabs, stray hits, and there are specific scenarios where you get full combo punished and eat 35 to 45% damage like in MK12. Again, that's why people love MK9 so much, cause that's what that game was all about. Casuals love it for the amount of content, the vibe of the game, the designs, the roster, the nod to the classic games. It's a celebration of MK's history. And pro players love it because it has a certain flow. It strikes a very specific balance balance between risk and reward. MKX still has some of that, but obviously less so, because of the heavier emphasis on rushdown and how easy it is to get stuck in the corner. But a lot of the fighting is still characterized by these fast, low-damage blows exchanged throughout the match, and what that basically means is you get to play the game more. There are obviously lots of situations where you're put in the blender and just die, where you might as well take your hand off the controller, but even with that, it still gives you more chances to win on average than its successors do. One other key aspect about Mortal Kombat X is just how impactful the combat feels. Because the emphasis was placed on the 1v1 fighting, everything was tweaked to make the bread and butter fighting look and feel as satisfying as possible. Characters are framed bigger, the sound effects and Foley all pack a great visceral punch, and have a nice thud to them that MK11, 12, and the Injustice games just lack, because they focus more on slap delays, echoes, reverbs, and other processing that gives every punch and kick this overload of wishy-washy mid-high frequencies, which may sound cool to a sound designer, but doesn't translate well into an actual fight, and doesn't sell that gut-wrenching thud nearly as well as MKX's no-nonsense pummel sounds. Lastly, but perhaps most importantly, the animations bring all of this together to sell the impact of every hit. Now, a lot of fun has been made with regards to the animation in NRS games in general. I myself sometimes poke fun at it, and it's something that channels like Sugar Punch documented all too well. But even with all their many problems, MKX animations still arguably do their job better than most other Mortal Kombat games in history. Even though, yes, the stances look weird, the pokes are god-awful, and some of the attacks look like there's a chest-high wall preventing their lower bodies from moving, other attacks are so goddamn satisfying to watch. Even more so to pull off. The classic example is Sub-Zero's overhead. That back two on its own generated so many whoas and boos and cheers from the crowd and reactions from casters at various tournaments. It's like its own character. You can argue it looks good, bad, kooky, weird, and everything in between. But the specifics of the animation don't matter as much. The end result just works. At the end of the day, it sells the impact. Sub-Zero lunging forward and putting all his strength and momentum into one brutal, unrefined chop and knocking the opponent right in the head. It's simple, it's effective, and being a comboable overhead, it also generates some excitement when it does hit, and the opponent gets opened up. Tremor's another good example. A lot of his moves, like, again, his overheads, both the normal attack and the special move, just look raw as hell. And when you take these moves and put them together in an actual match, along with the high mobility, the running, the jumping, braking, interactable use, and overall scrappiness, what you get is one of the most dynamic fighting game experiences on the market. It's even got MK9 beat in this regard, because even though MK9 looks impactful enough, the characters are a bit smaller and they move around a little bit too easily, and their movements are a bit too fast and flippant, which helps with the mobility for sure. Characters feel by far the easiest to control and move around in that game, but it comes at the cost of making some of these strikes look less impactful. As a general principle of animation, if you make things too fast, they lose impact. If you make things too slow, you lose believability. Check out this video of Batman fighting Hellhound. This guy's movements are flashy enough, but they play out so fast that it loses all sense of weight and impact. You get the feeling they're two paper cutouts flailing around. This is partly because of the way it's animated, not contorting the characters enough, no wind trails, dust, or clothes reacting to the impact enough. But even if you did all that, the animations simply go by too fast for them to register, and as a result, the characters lose that sense of weight and their attacks feel hollow. Compare that to this punch from Saitama, which, although greatly exaggerated and not necessarily appropriate for a Batman animation, still illustrates the general idea here. This one punch, pun not intended, looks like it has the force of a freight train, all because it occupies enough time and frames, and because that extra time is used to properly show the effects of the punch, the victim contorting, debris flying, etc. This is a very hard balance to strike in a regular animated flick, let alone a fighting game, where every single combination of movements and attacks has to look believable and not too wonky. MK9 veers a little too close to the fast side, where even though big hits like uppercuts look impactful enough, a lot of other attacks look and feel paper thin. They happen a little too fast and the characters recover a little too quickly from them. On the flip side, games like Virtua Fighter and Tekken sometimes err a bit on the slow side, whereby, even though all attacks have a sense of power and weight to them, a few of them seem a little too controlled and floaty to be believable, almost like it's partial slow motion or like too many frames were dedicated to them, because ironically, past a certain point, more frames don't necessarily always mean better animation, especially when it comes to animating fast-paced fast-paced action. Punches start to look too elaborate, characters float in the air a little too much, and the recovery frames for both characters sometimes feels a bit long. But this is again just for a few moves. It's that much more difficult to strike a good balance between these two extremes in a 3D fighter as opposed to a 2D one. But Tekken gets it right most of the time. And then you have the worst of both worlds, like MK11 or 12, where even though animations generally register as slow, they're somehow completely weightless and impactless in spite of that. Movements feel a bit too deliberate and over-animated, yet they don't take advantage of that to convey a sense of impact at all. Characters feel like they just lazily throw out moves in semi-slow motion all the time, and because they also look smaller due to the camera framing, it registers as that much more limp. MKX strikes a near-perfect balance, whereby the running, jumping, dashing, and a big chunk of the normals and special moves feel pretty damn fast, while still retaining a sense of impact because of the fluid, albeit kooky, nature of the animation, and because of the way combatants react to these attacks. And there's other tricks too. Jumping was slowed down a tad compared to MK9. That, coupled with characters being bigger, gives them a sense of weight. Dashing also affects this dramatically. Because dashing covers more ground and you can no longer cancel it however you like, it again makes the fighters feel weightier without sacrificing a general sense of speed and mobility, which are preserved by things like the run mechanic, the mobility of certain special moves, as well as the way the general animation is done. All of this makes Mortal Kombat X more visually compelling than many of its peers. Despite the graphics not being considered top-notch anymore, despite the visuals not being as crisp as those of its successors, and despite being a decade old at the time of recording, it still holds up incredibly well because it has this particular flow to it and nailed its visual identity. And it's the reason why so many people keep coming back to it. But the other big reason is fun. This game is so much damn fun. At the end of the day, beyond all the technical qualities, the visuals, whether or not it looks or animates good enough or is balanced enough or not, all of that pales in comparison to the #1 trait that any video game should possess, and that is to be fun to play. One of my mantras that I've been spreading across the internet the way a disease spreads through a morgue is fun trumps balance. There are other games I could give as examples here that got balanced to death over time until they strained all the fun out of them, but I don't even need to reach for those because MK11 is a more than adequate example here. After some players got annoyed by the fact that MKX was a little too fast for its own good and had perhaps one too many mix-ups and 50-50s in it, which made many matches feel like too much of a coin flip, NetherRealm decided to take that feedback to heart like their lives depended on it, and did a complete 180 with their next installment, Mortal Kombat 11. In that game, most mix-up options were removed, defensive options were beefed up, at least on paper, and characters now moved like a stone sloth. All of this was done in the name of balance, specifically as a way to promote footsies more, i.e. mid-screen play where neither player has the advantage. On paper, this solved every issue MKX had. In practice, those issues survived, and these changes added a host of new ones. Footsies still weren't happening much because many characters had ways to get around it, like tracking teleports and jump attacks that covered the whole screen. The tweaked defensive options might have seemed better at first, but the lack of interactables and slower overall mobility of the characters made them easier to pin down. And the removal of most mix-up options and character archetypes from the game, like pure 50-50 characters, grapplers, setup characters, or summons, didn't make the guessing game easier, it just made it more boring. This is a part of a larger issue in the games industry where things trend more and more towards endlessly tweaking competitive games until some hypothetical level of absolute balance is reached. That level of balance does not exist. Let me put it another way. The point of game balance is not to force a perfectly even win rate between all characters, factions, or races. The point of balance is to provide enough tools so that all of the characters, factions, and races in the game have a fighting chance, a realistic chance to win. And the problem with subtractive balancing, removing things, nerfing things, is it reduces the number of options players have at their disposal, which boxes players in and forces them down a particular playstyle. It's not that the game is more balanced, it's just more boring. In a game where 3 to 5 characters are top tiers, which is common, most games will have a handful of characters that are better than the rest, or more popular or favored in more matchups, or have certain options and utility that help them play the game a little better or bend its rules or what have you. If you nerf simplify, and remove things, those 3 to 5 characters will still be the top tiers. It's just that the other characters now have less tools at their disposal to compete with those 3 to 5. You might have a character that's legitimately crap tier, but has this one redeeming quality in that they've got these disgusting mix-ups, and when they get their offense going, there's no stopping them. Such a character, although objectively shit overall, might have still competed against a top-tier fighter. If they got their offense going, if the opponent didn't know the matchup well enough, if nerves or fatigue took over, there's a lot of scenarios. But if you simplify the game by all but removing most mix-ups from the game in the name of balance, that funky low-tier character no longer stands a chance. Balance actually gets worse, not better. A decidedly more minor aspect of MKX that still nonetheless adds a lot to the game is the menu, the appropriately minimalistic, dark aesthetic of it, or how even the select sounds are made to emulate a button press on a controller. A lot of minor little details like that were added to make this feel like a fighting player's game. The sleek, simple, non-exuberant overall approach is timeless, and aged way better than some of the other game's menus. The character select screen is similarly well thought out. Instead of going too minimalistic with just a static portrait or showcasing the fighters in their idle animation in the corners of the screen, and also instead of going too elaborate with the fighters approaching each other and clashing or generating some generic gameplay during the loading screen with the characters' silhouettes, MKX treats its select screen kinda like a pickup basketball game, where characters just hang back, almost leaning against a wall, waiting for you to pick them. They casually step forward as you highlight them, showcasing confidence, determination, or killing intent. And once you pick them, they turn sideways, eager to see who they'll be facing. It's a small touch, but it adds some grit and realism to the game, and gives it the vibe of a shady underground fighting tournament. MK9's story created a glaring problem for the saga going forward by way of murdering 3/4 of the cast, and in the process becoming a virtually impossible act to follow. The most admirable quality of MKX's story is it tried to follow it. Back in 1997, Mortal Kombat 4 attempted to set the stage for a passing of the torch. The original idea was to allow series veterans like Liu Kang and Kung Lao to retire and let a new generation of fighters take center stage. Characters like Fujin and Kai were already testing the waters in this sense, looking to slowly take over Raiden and Liu Kang's roles respectively. But due to various factors like structural changes within the company, the departure of lead lore master and co-creator John Tobias, and the new characters not being particularly popular with players, the new generation idea was more or less scrapped in favor of focusing on the existing cast, while still adding a slew of new supporting characters, realms, and reality-ending threats to the lore, which came with its own pros and cons. But now, with MK9 having wiped the slate clean and ending in the exact point in time where MK4 was supposed to begin, NRS not only had a second chance at the new generation plan, they were also practically forced to do it, thanks to the micro-holocaust its predecessor ended on. With too few characters left to take center stage in any possible sequel, this time, the developers committed themselves to the original idea behind MK4, and added a slew of new characters, young and old, all of them eager to leave their mark on the mythos. The result was a mixed bag. To MKX's credit, it truly went all in this direction. No expense was spared, no design was too extreme, no idea was off limits. It was a time of pure experimentation within the company, as the devs let their hair down and just designed whatever they thought was cool. The spirit of creativity was further fueled by the variation system covered earlier, which meant that not only were devs encouraged to design whatever, they were also allowed to design multiple versions of each character, and have 3 of those make the final cut, which is kind of unheard of. All of this is felt in the final product, not just through the obviously successful experiments that would go on to become fan favorites, even despite their meek roles in the story, but even through the seemingly less inspired creations, whose moves, animations, and general playstyles were undeniably fun to try out. As mentioned earlier, animation has never been NetherRealm's strong suit, with plenty of odd choices for attacks, limbs moving illogically or comically, character poses being strange and inconsistent, stances looking decidedly non-combat ready, already or absent entirely, their center of mass not moving properly, their limbs moving in isolation from the rest of their bodies, yet most of the moves still manage to communicate who these characters are effortlessly in spite of all these problems. Each character flavor is that strong. Most of the moves, even the poorly animated ones, still showcase the character's personality well and feel satisfying to pull off. And coupled with the fast pace, fluid movement, and the little details like satisfying impact sound and the occasional throwaway trash-talking line, end-of-round animations, or victory gloats, MKX's combat and characters feel livelier than they've ever been. I mentioned the characterization through combat first, because in the actual story mode, the characters are as dull as drywall. During combat and during the 1v1 intros, Cassie Cage is a snarky, wisecracking zoomer who makes light of every situation she's in and every opponent she's facing.
The lesser Cage.
Liu Kang Light.
A mouth in search of a fist.
I got bigger things to do than this.
Guess cows don't milk themselves.
You don't have to be like your dad, you know.
A word of advice?
Okay, but you never listen.
I meant, never mind.
Real funny. Know what's funny? Your face. Dude, you just insulted yourself.
Your lineage is impressive.
Is that your idea of a pickup line?
Your end is near.
You best keep your hands off it, princess.
Your very presence mocks me. Sorry, did you just say kick my ass?
A wise man learns from defeat.
You must be very wise.
In the story mode, Cassie is a restrained, tame, insecure leader who's out of her depth at every turn and says, "Fuck me" all the time. Aaron Black is a mysterious, masked gunslinger from a bygone era, inexplicably operating in Outworld despite his Earthrealm origin, whose demeanor, garb, and implied backstory raise nothing but questions, yet who gets 3 lines of dialogue in the story mode and loses every single fight. And perhaps most egregiously, Kotal Khan, who in every other respect gives off an imposing vibe, tall, menacing, powerful, well-spoken, well-designed, and Shao Kahn's successor, is nothing but a petty, short-sighted, underpowered poser in the story mode whose every decision makes me want to gouge his eyes out. And then mine. His first encounter with the new protagonists ends in a needless squabble over a petty thief, a fight which could have been avoided and which he loses to the new guy to make him look good. This has the opposite effect. Instead of making Kung Jin seem like a badass, it just makes Kotal Khan, the supposed powerful, wise new ruler of Outworld, seem like a bitch. And is made even worse by Kotal later immobilizing not just Kung Jin, but all 4 combat kids with a single gesture, making you wonder why he couldn't do that during his first battle with the Shaolin. And said immobilization comes as one of the dumbest decisions he makes, betraying the combat kids and thus provoking Earthrealm needlessly when he all but had everything he needed to secure Outworld stability. And finally, when he learns of Shinnok's return, his first instinct is to turn around and offer his cheeks to Shinnok, hoping the genocidal necromancer god will spare him and his realm. Pathetic isn't a strong enough word. Shao Kahn was also stupid in his own ways, but one of his redeeming qualities was he didn't bow down to anyone. Kotal, or rather Kotal's writers, misconstrue what sensible and pragmatic look like, and in the pursuit of writing that, end up creating a stupid idiot instead.
You're a stupid nigger.
A weak, spineless coward who bends over backwards every time the plot requires another character to beat him and look good. And considering what happens to him in MK11, one can only surmise that someone in the writing team hates him with a passion. That he was, for whatever reason, specifically created to be the butt of all jokes. That's the only conclusion that makes sense. All of this registers as one huge missed opportunity. The saga finally had the chance to impress us with some new blood that was solely needed and convince players that the usual incumbents like Liu Kang, Scorpion, and Johnny Cage are not the only ones who can hold the franchise together, and it had all the pieces in place to accomplish it. Yet when it came time to perform, the game hesitated. Instead of going all in on these new characters and their personalities, it knee-jerks and treats them shallowly, opting instead for a fairly similar retread of MK4's plot just with extra steps. The game's idea of going all in on the new characters is to have Cassie Cage, an inexperienced 20-year-old, defeat an empowered fallen elder god single-handedly because of the convenient payoff to a poor setup that registers as a Deus Ex Machina more than anything, and a decidedly unearned victory, much like Jin's victory over Kotal. Which is not to say the story doesn't put any effort into building up these characters. The non-linear chronology, the flashback scenes, Takeda or Jin's pasts, the slightly longer, more ponderous and introspective scenes, they're all a welcome change in tone and do what they're supposed to in the current story, which is both establish the new characters, get us in their headspace, and grapple with the horrendous events of Mortal Kombat 9. Yet none of the component parts add up to the desired effect, and the story ultimately fails in getting us invested enough in the series' newcomers. Between the nepotistic vibes and the copycat issues, with some of the younglings like Jackie being just a gender-swapped Jax, or Kung Jin just being Kung Lao with a bow, and yay, not to mention Ferrator being just Master Blaster from Mad Max 3 almost verbatim, or Devora being a trippy but kind of weird, stomach-turning addition to a setting full of cool ninjas and Asian influences, and also getting a disproportional amount of significance in the story, being one of the most competent characters out of nowhere, and literally making most of the plot happen single-handedly, killing fan favorites, and overall doing to Mortal Kombat what the Yuzhan Vong did to Star Wars, the balance between good character additions and bad ones starts to tip towards the bad pretty quickly. There's a reason why the only two combat kids that retain any kind of fans today are Cassie and Takeda, because they're the two dishes made up of more than just one ingredient. As mentioned, Jackie and Jin pretty much draw on just one family member to inform their entire character and appearance, but the other two have more veggies in their soup. Cassie is an unstable mixture of both Johnny and Sonya, whereas even though Kenshi is Takeda's father, he was raised and trained by Scorpion for a long time and thus inherits Kenshi's telepathic powers and the Shirai Ryu's training and tools. It's not much, but a little bit of diversity of influences goes a long way. At the very least, watching these characters wrestle with their heritage and their contrasting sides of themselves is interesting. For all the potential that these individual puzzle pieces have though, none of it does more collectively than the 1v1 intros I mentioned earlier. This one seemingly small feature innovates the genre more than it gets credit for. Whereas other fighting games characters still employ quaint catchphrases that are always invariably the same and make them feel like paper-thin action figures, NetherRealm saw an opportunity to add some more characterization to its roster through some fun pre-fight banter that would be unique to each permutation of characters and would cycle through different lines each time. While trivial at first glance, players quickly became invested in them to the point of complaining to the devs and event casters and telling them to shut up during the intro exchanges so they could hear what the characters were saying, which just underscores how starved the fighting game community is for any tidbit of character expression, to see their favorites come to life and exhibit real words, thoughts, feelings, to emote any kind of what would make them seem more real and justify players' attachment to them. For a genre that's technically all about its characters, the fighting game space is surprisingly stingy with any sort of such expression. This 1v1 pre-fight banter was so successful it became a staple in future NRS games, and some of MKX's pre-fight lines in particular were hilarious. So much so that people started making banter compilations on YouTube, and fans just watched them for their own sake.
I never considered you an enemy.
I never considered you at all.
Now that's just hurtful.
Seen a lot in your day?
I've survived many battles.
Then you know of the bitch slap.
A showdown? As in your films?
Did you like him?
Blindness has its benefits. Your voice is somewhat annoying.
Mira, bite ears off!
Well, that's considerate. Kira.
Kaino, you bloody prig!
Whatever.
Liu Kang?
Scum! You face Kung Lao!
Whatever. You will not read my thoughts.
There is very little to read.
I pity you, sightless one.
And I you, hairless rat.
Spend time with Mr. Cage recently?
You approach me as a foe.
Nah, I'm just out of ice cubes.
At times, I regret our alliance. Your mind powers.
What of them?
Exactly.
Hey, Mac.
We will end you.
We? Is your mother joining us?
It's a window into what could have been had they committed themselves to fully unleashing these characters and letting them express themselves completely within the game's story. Ultimately though, MKX's story failed to impress, and his new characters failed to get the desired reaction out of the franchise's fans, so NRS eventually decided to scrap this timeline completely, bring back all the classic characters, and reboot the whole thing. And we've been there ever since. There isn't much to say regarding the music, sadly. Most of the excitement surrounding MK music always came from the 95 film's illustrious soundtrack and its remixes and offshoots. What other iconic tracks the classic era had were never catchy in a way that would make them memorable or hummable at a moment's notice, and even those are absent in this 10th installment. Over time, Mortal Kombat got very good at filling its stages with standalone music that, while not necessarily iconic, generated excitement and just sounded cool. Mortal Kombat Deception did a good job of evoking a mood appropriate to whatever stage you were on. And while MK9's tracks, even with re-implementing some of the classics, were overall less distinctive, still had a few notable bangers. MKX lacks this entirely. While the soundtrack is serviceable enough and does the bare minimum of adding some atmosphere and liveliness to the proceedings, the songs themselves are fairly vapid, one-note, and uninspired. The main menu music is mainly just a Hollywood-style ostinato that we've heard a million times before, punctuated by the occasional big dom sound. And just to be clear, the problem isn't the lack of complexity. MK4's menu music is just some very minimalistic ambience, but manages to be effortlessly dark, eerie, and memorable in spite of it, and I still get asked where this track is from whenever I use it in a video. And that's really the issue. The instrumentation in many of these tracks and the way it's used isn't distinctive enough, and it doesn't evoke any kind of strong emotion as a result. The Sky Temple theme uses plenty of exotic instruments, particularly in the percussion section, but the way it's used is by simply repeating a very straightforward rhythm with no sort of syncopation or contrasting dynamics, and it sounds like it could be any other kind of percussive instrument as a result. And the other instruments and sounds don't really do much either. Compare this to the Sky Temple theme from Deception, where the first few bars are instantly recognizable despite being a very minimalistic Tibetan choir, a cue probably taken from the aforementioned 95 movie, which did more for Mortal Kombat's music than people realize, and some slight but noticeable and well-paced percussion. The MKX version tries to come alive somewhat in its third round variant, where the tone shifts to a more rock-heavy approach, which I thoroughly appreciate, but it's not enough to salvage the overall track. In fact, there's an overall hard rockish vibe to MKX as a whole, which I do think is very fitting, considering the overall aesthetic, but the minutiae of each track leaves to be desired. And speaking of variants, this is one great feature that MKX's music brought to the table. Each stage comes with 3 variants, one for each round, the goal being to escalate the sense of tension as the fight goes on and gets more intense and desperate, with the third round being the most distinctive and the absolute height of tension. This does wonders for investing the player in the fight and pumping even more adrenaline in their veins. When you've won one, lost one, and now the third and final round starts, the different music does an excellent job of conveying the fact that this is it! But it can't fully make up for the fact that these tracks can't really stand on their own 2 feet. It's very telling that the only piece of music I remember when I think of MKX is the Destroyed City one. But that's mostly because the song is one big loud guitar riff, so you notice it whether you like it or not. One of the few tracks that dare to step into the foreground a little more. And while it's serviceable enough, the riff itself comes across as just some random power chords strung together during a lunch break, and the groove is just as random to match. I think it's no coincidence that Destroyer made his own playlist for his MKX streams, or that nowadays I mute the music entirely and just listen to some podcast when I play. Music gets stale and repetitive over time anyway, and when the tracks are subpar, they become that much more tedious. However, there is a bit of music that's quite simply a brilliant fit for MKX. Unfortunately, it's not actually in the game. It's in the trailer. System of a Down's Chop Suey was featured in the launch trailer for MKX, which is, surprisingly, one of the best trailers I've ever seen to date. Not only did it hype people up for the game, it was also the best song you could have chosen for this game. Not just because of its aggressive, all-in, balls-out demeanor, which is very appropriate for MKX, but also because the lyrics fit the story flawlessly. Father, why have you forsaken me? There are so many instances where this fits. The Elder Gods forsaking Shinnok, Raiden accidentally roasting Liu Kang, Revenant Liu Kang forsaking Raiden, Outworld being abandoned by Shao, Kotal being given a hard time by Outworld, Mileena being lost without Shao, Takeda, Kenshi, Cassie, Jackie. I could go on all day. Not just that, but this was one of those trailers that cut up and organized the footage so deftly that it made the story look much better than it ended up being. It remains by far the best piece of soundtrack associated with the game. And it's not even in the game. I'm probably the worst person to discuss a fighting game's extra features, partly because I tend to be more interested in the actual fighting and less interested in the bells and whistles surrounding it, but also because I find most of the modern bells and whistles to be boring. Be that as it may, even I recognize the importance of diversifying your content in a genre that's notoriously scary and unfriendly to noobs and casuals. The 3D era solved this problem through mini-games, minor games within the game where you could pilot a chibi version of your favorite character and pit them against others in a Mario Kart-style racing game, or you could try Mortal Kombat's version of chess, which threw a wrench in the traditional strategy-heavy game by having pieces fight to the death to decide which pawn wins and which gets swept from the board. These games are remembered fondly by both myself and a big chunk of the community, and they fulfill the function of giving players who aren't singularly obsessed with sharpening their 1v1 skills something to do. MKX doesn't have that. None of the newer games have that. What MKX does offer is a faction system and various forms of ladders to beat, known as towers, neither of which are very compelling. The faction system is an attempt to rouse the community by having them join one of the popular factions within the mythos, and competing against each other in various activities to earn points. At the end of a set period of time, the faction with the most points wins. Only one problem.
We don't care. Let me tell you, we don't care.
The activities you accomplish for your faction are mostly just playing the game, and the thing you win is nothing more than bragging rights for an entity that's essentially just a name and nothing more. As a result, the faction system quickly fades into the background as something you forget was even in the game, and never really held much weight anyway. You can play as Kano and be part of the Lin Kuei faction, or main Sonya Blade and be a Brotherhood of Shadow recruit. There's nothing to make these things tangible enough to care about. You can switch factions whenever you like, the rewards are nothing but a scoreboard, and all of it registers as the company trying to do too much with far too little, to generate excitement over meaningless stats. The only thing it manages to do is annoy me whenever I log into the game, telling me to wait while it fetches the faction leaderboards, wresting control away from me when it could have just shown me that somewhere in the corner like on a news feed while I make my way to the practice mode or to a ranked match. What's worse, sometimes it'll do this on repeat, gathering data from a previous faction war, then a previous one, then a previous one after that, literally not letting me play the game. It's a fairly minor but still annoying tumor that infects an otherwise great 1v1-centric fighting game. The only other kind of content in the game is towers. Standard ladders, challenge towers, rotating towers with different modifiers at different times, and a boss fight mode where you face an unbeatable boss with super armor and try to deal as much damage as you can before it kills you. The damage is counted collectively for your entire faction and counts towards your final faction score. The idea is interesting enough on paper, but the execution is invariably clunky in a fighting game, especially one so heavily focused on the 1v1 aspect, with no tag system, no multiple fighters on screen, nothing. This kind of feature is obviously inspired from large-scale MMO raids against a single powerful enemy, perhaps with some Souls-like elements thrown in there, and there's a reason why you only see those in those kinds of genres, because they're much better equipped to facilitate that kind of battle than a fighting game is. The towers fulfill their basic function of providing some diversity of gameplay through various modifiers that make the fighting more random, chaotic, chaotic, less skill-intensive, and thus more palatable in a casual setting where you just want to have some lulls with friends, but it's so bare bones I can see the game's ribs poking out of its chest. The game can partly be forgiven for it since it understandably focused so many of its resources in the main 1v1 mode of play, which is arguably what a fighting game should do, but some of its attempts to diversify its content come across as desperate and as something it shouldn't have bothered trying. The only other piece of content is the crypt, which I've talked about before in not too positive a light, but for this video I'll just acknowledge it's one of the more successful pieces of content overall, especially when compared to the rest of the stuff I mentioned. While somewhat one note, it does offer a nice respite from the intense standard mode of play, just letting you explore a few dungeons in search of unlockable content, skins, moves, and decals. It's a one-time thing, not something you'll ever replay for fun the way you'd play a match of chess or motor combat, but overall it's better to have it in the game rather than not. Unlike its successors, Mortal Kombat X doesn't have a story-focused DLC, instead investing all of its resources into 2 combat packs worth of extra characters, and a couple extra skin packs. While this decision may be disappointing to some, it's also in line with the game's mission statement of focusing everything on the combat and the characters. It also helps to know that MKX's DLC characters are the best in the franchise's history, not just because of the specific characters included or the fact that you get 3 versions of each via the variation system, but also because they're just that good. The way in which each were brought to life is fun, compelling, and, in the case of the guest characters, accurate to their original portrayals. Tanya's super fun and actually comes with 3 different archetypes. Tremor became the poster boy for MKX, considered by many to be the character that plays the game the best. Triborg literally puts 4 characters in one, making it more accurate to say that Combat Pack 2 has 7 characters rather than 4. Alien and Predator are both extremely accurate representations of their movie selves, particularly Predator. And this also marks a historic moment, the first time when you have both horror icons in the same game and get to reenact the AVP movies. Jason is a solid, high-tier beast of a character that hits hard and is just satisfying as hell to play. Baraicho is true to his name and fame as the quirky kung fu master that trained half the cast, and even though people kind of ignored him initially, once players got acquainted with his toolkit, Bo became a mix monster and one of the most difficult characters to fight, with countless overhead low options, hard-to-escape setups, and a level of offensive strength such that once he gains a little bit of momentum, it feels almost impossible to stop him. The devs' insistence on retaining his more disgusting side, like his habit of farting, which they made into an actual move this time around that's common across all variations and thus the game basically forces you to use it, is something I personally don't much care for and has kept me from experimenting with the character much. But overall, he's an extraordinary addition to the cast with a lot of work put into him, to the point where it's hard to imagine a better implementation of Baraicho. Except if you remove the farts. That counts as better, I guess. Leatherface is the odd one out. He definitely conforms to the horror thematic that the guests have in this game, but sticks out like a wasted roster spot due to how decidedly uncool he is compared to the others. Nevertheless, the team did their best to make his gameplay as fun as that of the other DLC fighters, and he definitely hits hard in the right hands. Needless to say, I don't care much for him, and would have much preferred someone like Spawn to occupy that last spot, instead of imprisoning him in the tortoise-paced MK11 where most of his abilities are wasted. My favorite reaction to Leatherface's announcement to this day comes from Ketchup and Mustard's reaction video for Combat Pack 2.
He'll walk in. Fuck Leatherface! Fuck you, Leatherface!
Some of the limitations and shortcomings of X became apparent right away. Having to input 3 button presses just to initiate a run, and then having to press more buttons to stop feels tedious, arbitrary, and needlessly punishes the newbie player. Conceptually, it makes sense that you'd associate running with dashing, and want to make the former an extension of the latter. But dashing itself requiring 2 button presses makes this control scheme get very complicated very quickly, and it's compounded by advanced mechanics that require run canceling to use, like fireball fireball cancels. The idea is you input your fireball move, but you cancel and do a fake out as a way to extend pressure and keep the opponent guessing. But you can only cancel a fireball by dashing, and you can't move your character while they're dashing, so you have to then cancel the dash into a run, which gives you back control of your character, and then finally press another attack button to close the loop. Contrived is putting it mildly. Having to do a string, then input down back 1 in time, hold the 1 down while pressing forward block, then timing your next standing 2 such that the window is too small for your opponent to do much of anything, but not too fast that it won't come out, and not too late either, because you might get punished for it or the opponent might escape. There is no way beginners or even intermediates will master that in a reasonable amount of time. Fighting games are known for these kinds of complicated inputs, which is arguably questionable in itself, but that's not the problem here. These arbitrarily difficult inputs seem at odds with MKX's overall intentions, namely adding depth without sacrificing simplicity. That design philosophy can be observed in most aspects of the game, except this one, which is why it sticks out like a sore thumb. It almost feels like they wanted this game to be taken more seriously, not just competitively, but within the fighting game space as a whole, and they made this small part of the inputs deliberately difficult. And the problem with this kind of difficulty is it just comes down to muscle memory. Reacting fast enough to the opponent making a mistake with a proper punish, or making the right read in a high-stress situation is always going to be skill-intensive. You get better at it, but it's still a challenge every single time. Yet complicated inputs are only challenging until you get the muscle memory down. After that, it's on autopilot. Which begs the question of why bother with the complicated inputs in the first place. That's a discussion in itself, but in MKX's case specifically, it comes across as a strange decision that just makes it needlessly hard to pick up the game. And is that much stranger when you have another button whose only function is to make your character face the other way, because this button could have easily taken over the run function and made things simpler for everyone. Another problem is corner play. Although emphasizing rushdown and corner play was always the intention, MKX takes it way too far. Click randomly through any of Destroyer's videos, and 80% of the time you'll see characters stuck in the corner. This gets old quickly for players who just do the same set play over and over again if they're the offender, or have to stay put and guess the same mix-ups over and over again if they're the defender. It also gets old for the viewer. That high-speed, dynamic fighting I mentioned where characters fly past the whole screen and make adequate use of all the space given to them disappears entirely, and we're left watching the same corner beat down ad nauseum. Which can be exciting in its own way, to see who reads the other better, but it's a much more static, repetitive fight. This could potentially be solved by making the stages somewhat larger, because all it takes is one electric fly to push you from the middle of the stage all the way to the corner, and that's indeed how many matches start. But if the stages were around 40% larger, that would be enough to circumvent this. Having a bit more ground to cover ensures you don't wind up in the corner in the first 2 seconds of the fight, while also keeping corner play an important part of the game. You have a bit more freedom to run around, jump, dash, slide, teleport all over the place without the fear of ending up in the corner 2/3 of the time. Then there's the speed of the game. It's hard to critique this aspect when every player has their own subjective idea of how fast a game should feel. Players who enjoy a slower, more deliberate pace, with lots of footsies, fireball clashing, and no running, will obviously not appreciate Mortal Kombat X characters behaving like 2 roadrunners on cocaine, while other players who have no patience for long, drawn-out tactical fights will feel much more at home here. Still, there's something to be said about how quickly your character's life bar can drain before your very eyes. Even after playing this game for over 1,000 hours, picking it back up presented some challenges. On the one hand, the litany of moves, strategies, and possibilities open to me were exciting, and I had retained most of my muscle memory, so it was like playing the game for the first time again without being too dumb to understand it. On the other hand, it's impossible for me to express how sickening it feels to be caught in the corner against someone like Liu Kang, blocking a carefully choreographed orchestra of pressure strings into fireball cancels, into more pressure strings, into a poke, into a grab, into staggered strings, all of it looping in on itself with frame-perfect precision by no-life people who play like they haven't seen the light of day in months. Interrupting that pressure is possible, in the same way walking a tightrope with a cow on your back is also technically possible. It's even more egregious when your character isn't equipped with the appropriate tools to counter any of this, whereby your normals are too slow compared to the opponent's, so theirs will always connect before yours do, your armored options suck, your special special moves have clunky hitboxes, and many other things. The speed at which you need to think and act is lightning fast and only really comfortable for pro players, which makes me suspect the ideal speed for a Mortal Kombat game would be around 70% of the speed of MKX. Thankfully, you mostly encounter this problem with a specific few characters. For the most part, the game is relatively easy to pick up and enjoy, things like run mechanics and fireball cancels notwithstanding. This segues into another contentious issue about X, which is that the timing required to pull off basic things is often a bit too strict. Some moves that should be easily punishable on block, like teleports or dive kicks, often go unpunished because the window is deceptively small, smaller than the frame data makes it out to be. And when you factor in lag from online play, players sometimes straight up get away with murder. It's made even worse by the fact that even on block, things like Cyber Sub-Zero's dive kick pushes them away from you significantly, so not only is your punish window very short, you also have to select an attack that's both fast enough and has enough range to reach them in time before they can recover and block. And some characters simply don't have that. This crosses a line and makes the game feel too scrubby for its own good, and definitely not in a good way. It's not all bad though. To a certain point, it's important to not give every single flubbed attack a 40-year punish window. It's okay to require players to be on their A game to punish certain small things because it's part of what creates variety, excitement, and uncertainty in matches. As discussed earlier, making players feel safe enough to throw out at least minor attacks without being too afraid of the potential reprieve is what made MK9 so enjoyable. If you think about any sport, game, or competition, the main reason why you watch is the uncertainty. Chess is considered to be one of the most boring sports out there because things are the most certain there. At the highest level, you can almost map out the entire game from the first handful of moves. And we always hate when the same guy wins everything because there's no uncertainty. Why even watch the game if we know how it'll turn out? Combos are a great example of this. Combos exist for two reasons. Number one, it's a performance, a form of creative expression where you get to show what you've labbed painstakingly for hours, and number two, they add uncertainty to the game. There's always a chance, however small, that you'll drop your combo. That's important because the high stress of a tournament, of money being on the line, of it being the last tie-breaking match, those add up and compound things. That's what makes a champion. It's someone who can deal with all that stress, all those high-pressure situations, and keep it together. So that uncertainty is a test, and it makes matches more fun for us to watch with bated breath to see what happens. A tight punish window accomplishes the same thing. It requires you to be on top of your game at all times to capitalize on that small window, and the fact that you won't always capitalize is a feature, not a bug. That said, it is still arguably a bit too narrow, at least some of the times, not because it's too fast for the players to take advantage of it, but it's too hard for certain characters to take advantage of it. Some characters cannot punish Sub-Zero's dive kick for reasons I've already mentioned. Broadly speaking, a lot of the frame data is misleading like this, because some attacks are listed as being extremely minus and punishable on block, but in practice, the pushback, the hitboxes, the overall circumstances make it way too hard, sometimes impossible, to punish these attacks, so it would need to be toned down. Oh, and enough with the female hitboxes. Just stop it. Get help. And one other thing that NetherRealm games just can't seem to get right is jump-ins and anti-airs. Jump-ins are far too OP and anti-airs are far too inconsistent. Later games tried to correct this through things like up block, but that just adds extra steps to a problem that should, by all accounts, have an easy fix. Never mind that some characters' jump-in animations are so conveniently lunged forward and their lower bodies just seem to disappear along with their hurt boxes. You also have characters like Alien and Kung Jin who will add an extra foot to their range by way of an arm blade and staff respectively. And not only are anti-airs thoroughly inconsistent across the board, some characters have way poorer anti-air options than others, simply due to their hitboxes or their uppercuts being significantly slower than that of others. Considering jump kicks already have a lot more range but are almost impossible to combo off of, it's hard to understand why jump-in punches and neutral jump punches were made that effective in this game, considering they'd still be widely used even if they were half as powerful, just by the nature and effectiveness of the tool itself. Online functionality is good enough, albeit very minimalistic. Ranked, unranked, lobbies, aka rooms, King of the Hill, the usual suspects are all present. But there's an austere feel to the online component. Compare these menus to the Tekken 8 Lounge, or heck, even MK9, which at least had things like fun chibi avatars during things like King of the Hill, and MKX's online experience starts to feel somewhat unexciting. It's also made clunky by the many prompts you have to go through. Press accept to enter the online mode. Wait an eternity to get ranked against some someone. Get another prompt when the online match ends, telling you that the match has ended, even though you know that the match has ended. Tower battles and team battles are okay additions, but they're never used. Something resembling a tournament mode would have been far more appreciated, considering to this day, whenever you try to run an online tournament, you have to use King of the Hill, which needlessly boots you out to the character select screen after every match, even if it's a best 3 out of 5 and no one wants to change their character. It's clunky and slows down the pacing needlessly. Also, owners of the PC version will no doubt remember that the initial PC port of MKX didn't have the new rollback netcode that the other versions supported at launch, and received it much later as an update, which was stupid and probably a painstaking process. But by far the biggest inadequacy that hurts the online experience to this day is the lack of crossplay. I play on PC. I have plenty of people who have consoles that I'd like to play against. There are plenty of console people who'd like to get into the game for the first time and play each other, but half are on Xbox and half are on PlayStation. The fact that MKX managed to retain a decent player base to this day is impressive, but it's squandered by the fact that these people can't all come together and play against each other. And overall, it's probably the thing that hampered the MKX community the most. One thing I forgot to talk about is the stages, and that's because it never crossed my mind. And that's not a good sign. While the stages in Mortal Kombat X are pretty well made on a technical level, with great textures, detail, and a good sense of scale, and while they avoid the capital sin of trying to cross into the foreground too much with much too busy compositions, they end up committing the other capital sin in the process. They're just boring. MK9 stages were all vibrant and exciting in their own way. The utter chaos of a post-apocalyptic city, the excitement of a rooftop with an all-out war happening in the sky, the beautiful vista of the pit stage, the sense of danger from fighting next to an acid bath, the Matrix vibes of the subway stage. All of these arenas had something cool or exciting about them. And it's no coincidence that the only stage that evokes any of that in MKX is the pit that they ported over from 9 later in the game's life. Because the base stages of X, while again perfectly fine on a technical level, fail to entice or excite in any way. Part of it is out of the game's hands. These are just the locales you visit in the story mode, so naturally those have to be the stages you fight in. On the other hand, if this were Street Fighter or King of Fighters, you can bet your buns there would be more people in that marketplace. There'd be merchants arguing with potential customers, a woman randomly slapping a potential suitor, a guy rolling a cart full of cabbages, and a slew of people cheering or booing your fight. And if all that would make the scenery too busy, then it falls on the environment designers to make Outworld look like something a little more distinctive than a vanilla oriental desert. The usually living forest was replaced with a frozen one, which, I mean, no other term could get my point across better than frozen. As in, nothing happens. Once again, the stage itself is beautifully done, but it's strange for a franchise that's so chock full of interesting scenery from all these magical realms to settle for a forest, a courtyard, a jungle. The Jinsei chamber is fairly interesting, but suffers a bit from a lack of scale. You'd think the essence of an entire realm would occupy vastly more space in an impressive hall, catacomb, or even a full Underdark style world. The Linkway Temple fares much better because it has that sense of scale as well as beauty, with the impressive vista in the background while also offering a couple key points of interest in the foreground, like the statue and its 2 torches. The Sky Temple stage is probably the most impressive, offering everything I just mentioned, plus intense dramatic rain, lightning, and an overall aesthetic that, while familiar, is just exotic enough to aptly communicate that this is a superpowered deity's abode. Most of the other stages are fairly static though, with not much of interest happening in Quan Chi's fortress, destroyed city, random forest, random jungle, random courtyard and marketplace that I always get mixed up, which is another bad sign. Overall, the environment design is probably the biggest component that drags MKX too far in the austere direction. Too stripped back, desaturated, and a bit barren. It's quite unfortunate that the most lively combat the series has ever seen had to be paired with the most lifeless backdrop. Mortal Kombat has always done its best to be on the cutting edge. Necessity breeds innovation. From digitizing actors into sprites due to a lack of resources, staff, or a tight deadline, to making the risky leap from 2D to 3D and expanding the scope of the franchise with things like Conquest Mode, fighting styles, and minigames, to rising from its own ashes and reinventing itself, creating 2 of the most significant titles in its history after so many years, the franchise's legacy is undeniable. The last decade has been a slew of misfires, declining sales, growing discontent that all spell uncertainty about the franchise's franchise's future. MKX was, in the eyes of many, the last great Mortal Kombat game, and it still holds up to this day.